My world collapsed the moment my girlfriend betrayed me in the cruelest way imaginable. What started as a discovery of her infidelity turned into a nightmare that left me scarred for life. To hide her affair, she accused me of the unthinkable rape. Her words were venomous lies, but they struck with deadly precision, destroying everything I held dear. I still remember the cold, fluorescent light of the interrogation room. The questions were relentless, their tone accusatory. Though no evidence supported her claims, the weight of the accusation alone felt suffocating. After days of living as though I were a criminal, the truth finally prevailed, and I was released. But freedom came at a price I never anticipated: my own family's love and trust. When I returned home, hoping for solace, I was met with contempt and disbelief. My father's voice, once filled with pride, was now laced with disgust as he spat the words, "You've brought shame upon us." My mother, unable to even look at me, wept silently. They didn't care that I was innocent. In their eyes, the mere accusation was enough to damn me. I begged them to believe me, to see the truth, but it was like screaming into a void. They cast me out, severing the ties that once bound us. As I stood there on the threshold of my childhood home, their rejection was a wound deeper than any betrayal my ex-girlfriend could have inflicted. Now I wander alone, bearing the burden of her lies and their judgment. How could they, my own flesh and blood, choose her to see over my truth? That question echoes in my mind, a cruel reminder of the love I lost, the family I can never return to, and the life her lies stole from me. After my family turned their backs on me, I knew there was no going back. The pain of their rejection was a constant reminder that my old life was irreparably shattered. I decided to leave it all behind, not just the town that had become a prison of whispers and judgment, but even my name, which had been dragged through the mud. With nothing but a few belongings and the weight of my past, I moved to a city far enough away that no one would know my story. There I started anew. I changed my name, erasing the identity that tied me to the betrayal and loss. Driven by the need to rebuild, I found solace in books and education, enrolling in a teaching program at a small university. Teaching felt like a way to reclaim something pure, a chance to guide others toward a better path, even as I struggled to find my own. Graduating was a milestone I hadn't thought I'd reach, but it gave me the courage to take another leap, moving overseas. In a foreign country where no one knew my past, I was finally free to live without the shadow of false accusations. I built a new life brick by brick, each step forward feeling like a triumph over the pain that had once consumed me. It was there that I met her, my wife, the woman who saw me not for my scars but for my resilience. With her, I found love again, something I had thought was forever lost. Together, we built a family, and when I look at our 2 children, I see hope and redemption. They don't know the full story of their father's past yet, but they are the proof that even from the darkest depths, a new life can grow. Years passed, and I thought I'd buried my past for good. The wounds from my family's betrayal still lingered, but I had learned to live with them. My wife and children were my solace, my anchor in a life far removed from the lies and abandonment I had endured. Yet, no matter how much I tried to forget, the echoes of my family's rejection still haunted me. Then, one unremarkable afternoon, everything changed. I opened the door to find my father standing there, aged far beyond his years. His hands trembled, and his eyes held a mix of shame and desperation I'd never seen before. The man who once disowned me without hesitation now looked as though the weight of his actions had finally crushed him. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. Those words, ones I had longed to hear yet never expected, hit me like a tidal wave. He went on to explain how, years after our estrangement, he had stumbled upon the truth. Sorting through an old phone, he discovered damning text messages from my ex-girlfriend to her lover, detailing their affair and the cruel scheme she had orchestrated to cover it up. She had lied to save herself, and in doing so, destroyed my life. My father admitted that the realization had tormented him. He had wanted to come sooner, but had been paralyzed by guilt and shame. "I failed you," he said, tears streaming down his face. For a moment, anger surged within me, but it was soon eclipsed by the sheer weight of the moment. Though his apology could never undo the years of pain, it was a start. The walls I had built around my heart began to crack, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to hope that reconciliation might be possible. As my father sat across from me, pouring out his apologies and recounting the guilt that had consumed him for years, I felt a storm of emotions churn within me. This was the moment I had once yearned for, the validation that I had been wronged, the acknowledgement of their betrayal. Yet now that it was here, it brought no solace. The scars they had left ran too deep. I listened in silence as he pleaded for reconciliation, his voice trembling with regret. He spoke of sleepless nights, haunted by memories of turning his back on me when I needed him most. He spoke of the truth he had uncovered, the evidence of my ex-girlfriend's deceit that had vindicated me far too late. But as he talked, all I could think about was the loneliness I'd endured, the years spent rebuilding a life shattered by their abandonment. "I appreciate your apology," I finally said, my voice calm but resolute. "But where were you when I was being torn apart? When I was desperate for even a sliver of support, you turned away. You didn't just believe her lies, you condemned me without a second thought. And now, after all this time, you expect me to welcome you back?" He looked at me, his face stricken with pain, but I pressed on. "I've built a new life, a life filled with people who stood by me, who believed in me when no one else did. My wife, my children, her family, they are my family now. They were there when you weren't. And I cannot forget that." He tried to argue, to convince me that we could start anew, but I shook my head. Forgiveness isn't something I can give so easily. I've moved on, and I don't want to reopen wounds that have barely healed. I'm sorry, but I can't reconcile with you or anyone else who abandoned me in my darkest hour. The look on his face was one of defeat, but I stood firm. As he walked away, I felt a strange mix of sorrow and relief. I knew I had made the right decision. My past may have shaped me, but it no longer defined me. My family, my wife, my children, and those who truly loved me was all I needed. Marriage was a journey I embraced with both hope and trepidation. After years of rebuilding my life, I was determined to be the husband and father I had never known growing up. My wife, an extraordinary woman of unwavering strength, stood by me despite the baggage I carried from a broken past. Together, we built a home filled with warmth and love, welcoming two beautiful children who became the center of our universe. But life was far from a fairy tale. My work required me to travel frequently, often leaving my family behind for weeks at a time. The miles between us weighed heavily on my heart, and each departure felt like a small betrayal of the promise I'd made to always be there for them. Late nights in foreign cities, staring at photos of my family on my phone, I couldn't shake the gnawing fear that my absences were creating cracks in the foundation of our happiness. The strain was evident. My wife, though endlessly patient, sometimes struggled under the weight of parenting alone. There were moments of tension, whispered arguments in the dead of night about the toll my career was taking on us. "You're missing so much," she once said, her voice trembling. "The kids need you. I need you." Her words cut deeper than she could have known because I felt the same ache, the same fear that I was failing the people I loved most. Still, we pressed on, bound by a love that had weathered storms before. I tried to make every moment count when I was home bedtime stories, family dinners, stolen moments of laughter. Despite the challenges, our family thrived, a testament to the resilience we had forged together. Yet in the back of my mind, I always wondered if the sacrifices I made to provide for them might one day cost me more than I could bear. It was supposed to be a rare break, a brief moment when my business trip was unexpectedly canceled. I had been away for what felt like an eternity, the weight of my absence pressing down on me. My mind was already on my wife and children, eager to return home and make up for the time lost. But when I walked through the door, something felt off. It was an unspoken tension hanging in the air, a subtle shift that I couldn't quite place. The kids were excited to see me, their laughter echoing through the house. But then, as I played with them, something in their chatter caught my attention. My son, barely 5, mentioned something about mom's friend who played with them when I was away. He pretends to be daddy when you're gone, my daughter innocently added, her words lingering in the room like a heavy fog. My heart stopped. My blood ran cold. 1,000 questions flooded my mind, but I couldn't voice them. What did they mean? Who was this friend? Why hadn't I heard about him before? I tried to push it aside, assuming it was just a child's misunderstanding. But the words wouldn't leave me, gnawing at my thoughts. That night, I confronted my wife, but she dismissed it as a simple mix-up. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to, but something deep inside me refused to let it go. Over the next few days, the pieces started falling into place. The small signs I had overlooked, the odd text messages she'd received when I wasn't around, the unexplained hours she'd spent out of the house. My suspicion grew, a shadow creeping into the edges of my thoughts. The cracks in our perfect life began to widen, and I couldn't ignore the mounting evidence that something far darker was taking root behind the facade of our seemingly happy home. It was the worst kind of betrayal, the one I hadn't seen coming, the one that made me question everything I thought I knew about the woman I had loved and the family I had worked so hard to protect. The pain of what I had heard earlier that day was unbearable, but nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to do. I had decided that I needed proof. No more questions, no more doubts. It was time to face the truth, no matter how painful it might be. I wasn't going to let myself be blinded by trust anymore. I needed to see it with my own eyes. So I pretended to leave for another business trip, just as I had done countless times before. The routine was familiar, and my wife wouldn't suspect a thing. But instead of boarding a flight, I parked my car a few blocks from home and waited, my heart pounding in anticipation. It wasn't long before I saw the man, the secret friend of my wife, pull up to our house. He was there again, just as the children had said. The sight of him made my blood run cold, but I knew I had to remain calm. I watched as he walked to the front door, and my stomach twisted with every step he took. I could barely breathe as I realized that everything I had suspected was true. This was the man who had been playing the role of the father figure in my absence. He was the one who had been there for her while I was gone, and now I was witnessing the undeniable reality of their affair. With my heart in my throat, I dialed my wife's mother, my mother-in-law, with a shaking hand. "I need you to come over," I said, my voice almost unrecognizable. "It's time to pack her things." When my mother-in-law arrived, I didn't say a word. We didn't need to. She could see it in my eyes, the devastation, the anger, the heartbreak. Together, we walked into the house, and without a word, I handed her the task of helping my wife pack up and leave. There was no need for any more explanations. I had caught her in the act, and now she had no choice but to face the consequences of her actions. It felt surreal as I watched her leave, the life we had built together slipping through my fingers. But in that moment, I knew there was no going back. There was no room for betrayal in my heart. The aftermath was nothing short of devastating. After the discovery, the walls that had once held our marriage together crumbled into dust. It became clear that there was no going back. I filed for divorce, not out of anger, but out of a deep sense of betrayal that could never be undone. I fought for custody of our children, knowing that I could never trust their mother again. I needed to protect them, to shield them from the chaos and deceit she had brought into our lives. The court agreed with me, and I was granted full custody. As I sat down with my children, I explained everything, how their mother had been unfaithful and how, despite everything, I would always be there for them. It hurt me deeply to see the confusion in their eyes, the pain of their innocence being shattered. I promised them that we would be okay, that we would rebuild our lives together. I told them that I wouldn't remarry until they were older and could understand the decisions I made. I wanted them to know that my priority would always be them, and I would never make any choices that might hurt them again. Meanwhile, my ex-wife reached out repeatedly through the children, apologizing, pleading for forgiveness. She sent messages, left voicemails, hoping I would relent and take her back. But each time I refused. I couldn't erase the wounds she'd caused, and The damage was irreparable. It wasn't just about the affair, it was about the trust, the family we once had, and the promises that were broken. I couldn't let her back into our lives, not after everything she had done. My children deserved better, and I owed them a future without the constant reminders of betrayal. It was heartbreaking, but I knew I had made the right choice. The road ahead was long, but it was one I would walk with my children by my side, and nothing else mattered.